Hi friends, Coach Host Eric here of the Debate Police, and today we have a special episode in which I'm going to present a particular case, the AF side of the compulsory national service topic. So there was a resolution about a year ago, and it was about compulsory national service, and I like the cases I made for this particular topic. And so I thought I'd use them as demonstration cases to kind of go over what it looks like to actually have a real debate case. Because people, when we debate, usually on the internet or in other contexts, we have this sort of discursive persuasion thing going on that's a little distinct from real debate. Now, real debate may be, in the end, actually somehow less persuasive. I'm not saying that it's not, but it's highly informative about how persuasive debate, in the sense that two people are orating at each other rather than competing in argumentation per se, can be vastly improved. So anyway, I'm going to go through this case. I'm going to talk about how to think about how one can think about going from resolution to argumentation presentation. Okay, because that's sort of the critical process involved in case making, is determining what to do with a resolution. And anyway, I'm going to play this theme song now, and then I'll begin. And I'll share the document.
Debate police. All the people with their arguments state their claims with such confidence. If or not they know, things has yet to be ascertained. All the people with their arguments state their claims with such confidence. If or not they know, things has yet to be ascertained. Police.
Okay, so let's take a look at this case now. Affirmative roadmap. So this is the AF on the resolution. The resolution reads, in the United States, national service ought to be compulsory. The framework, this is a roadmap where I explain what's going to be done in the case. So first I'm going to define ought, define compulsory, define national service, 3 analytics here, spike rights, supervenes on consent, prefer my framework, these things, blah, blah, blah. So, prefer my framework, Wayne, education is the most important impact in the round. So, in other words, that impacts to education are the thing that we ought to be looking to decide whether or not we vote on who we vote for. So, well, you'll see how it plays out. This is just the roadmap. It doesn't explain anything. So let's go down to here. Framework, definition, ought. Ought used to indicate duty or correctness, used to indicate a desirable or expected state. Definition, compulsory. Compulsory, required by law or rule, obligatory, involving or exercising compulsion, coercive. G, national service definition block. Tag, I affirm the status quo in which all children perform national service called compulsory education. Okay. This is in favor of compulsory education, I guess. Definition A, national service, a period of compulsory service. Definition B, a federal program that enables young people to pay back government through community work. Okay. Topicality, learning. Education is widely considered a legitimate form of national service in the status quo. CNCS, June 2017. The Corporation for National Community Service is a federal agency that annually engages millions of Americans in service and volunteering at more than 50,000 sites across the country. Senior Corps and AmeriCorps members play a vital role in improving education. Analysis. There is no disagreement among those who make or study public policies regarding the legitimacy of education as an expression of national service. In the status quo, student teachers can enter voluntary national service through AmeriCorps or the CNCS, and there is broad agreement regarding the positive impact of such service upon the country and the citizenry. Thus, it must be additionally noted that learning is a critical form of national service as well. If to accomplish learning in another is to improve the nation, then the learner as well as the teacher is engaged in national service. Analytic B, consistency. Compulsory education is compulsory national service to which all citizens are subject, provided they reside in the country while classified as a minor, youth. I affirm the status quo in which children under 16 are required to provide a period of national service called compulsory education. Currently, all children in the United States under 16 are compelled by law to attend school. They are not compensated for this service. Instead, it is understood to be part of their obligation as citizens and the fulfillment of their end of the social contract. This case makes me laugh because I don't believe any of this bullshit, you know? Analytic C. Burdens. To negate this resolution, then, my opponent must either negate the institution of compulsory education or defeat these ground arguments here made, which establish for the purposes of this round that compulsory education is, in fact, a form of national service. Analytic D. Spike rights. Supervenes on consent. Say that an individual has had its rights violated in a way that has any impact under a rights-based framework is to speak of an individual who has the capacity to consent. Children cannot legally consent. As the compulsion of children for their welfare may be understood as coercive, but not as violating rights. Complete bullshit, by the way. Prefer my framework. That's what PMF stands for. Education is the most important impact in this round. CNCS, June 2017. In doing so, members not only improve the schools and communities they serve, they also transform their own lives. AmeriCorps and Senior Corps programs play a critical role in strengthening schools around the country. National service supports millions of youth. More than 44,000 AmeriCorps members and nearly 45,000 Senior Corps volunteers providing school and after-school support at at-risk youth. Value. That's my value, societal welfare. Value criterion. Optimization of individuals through education. Card 95. The fact that human nature, phenotypically expressed, can be either active or passive, constructive or indolent, suggests more than mere dispositional differences, and is a function of more than just biological endowments. It also bespeaks a wide range of reaction to social environments that is worthy of our most intense scientific investigation. Specifically, social contexts catalyze both within and between person differences in motivation and personal growth, resulting in people being more self-motivated, energized, and integrated in some situations, domains, and cultures than in others. Really? Wow, that really says a lot. Definition: actualized, active, integrated, responsible, and self-aware. Contention 1, Gellner, 1983. Compulsory education is key to community and social justice. The industrial society is different. Its territorial and work units are ad hoc. Membership is fluid, has a great turnover, and does not generally engage or commit the loyalty or identity of members. In brief, the old structures are dissipated and largely replaced by an internally random and fluid totality, within which there is not much, certainly when compared with the preceding agrarian society, by way of genuine substructures. There is very little in the way of an effective binding organization at any level between the individual and the total community. This total and ultimate political community thereby acquires a wholly new and very considerable importance, thanks both to the erosion of subgroupings and the vastly increased importance of a shared literary dependent culture. The state, inevitably, is charged with the maintenance and supervision of an enormous social infrastructure. The educational system becomes a very crucial part of it, and the maintenance of the cultural linguistic medium now becomes a central role of education. The citizens can only conceptually operate within that medium, which is coextensive within the territory of the state, and its educational and cultural apparatus, which needs to be sustained or cherished. The role of culture is no longer to make visible and authoritative the structural differences within a society. On the contrary, when on occasion cultural differences do tie in to reinforce status differences, this is held to be somewhat shameful for the society in question and an index of partial failure of its education system. The task with which that system is entrusted is to turn out worthy and competent members of a total society whose occupancy of posts within it will not be hampered by the factional loyalties to subgroups within the total community, and if some part of the educational system by default or by surreptitious design actually produces internal cultural differences and thereby permits or encourages discrimination, this is counted as something of a scandal. Okay, so what's the point of all of this? This thing here. Well, it's trying to say that basically education prevents discrimination, okay? And that we have to have big public education because of that way we turn out worthy and competent members of society. You'll notice I didn't highlight loyal. Contention 1A. Linguistic homogenization is the engine by which cultural unity is attained. Conversely 2007. High culture must simultaneously consider itself as the model of human comportment and be the medium of a viable industrial system made up of formal skills and articulated in a definite language. A separate high culture develops from the industrial need to promote a shared communication to over a whole society. Hence, culture overlaps with communication, most notably language. Contention 2. Self-determination theory explains how a nation's health supervenes upon education. Regardless of social strata or cultural origin, examples of both children and adults who are apathetic, alienated, and irresponsible are abundant. Such non-optimal human functioning can be observed not only in our psychological clinics, but also among the millions who, for hours a day, sit passively before their televisions or wait listlessly for the weekend as they go about their jobs. The persistent, proactive, and positive tendencies of human nature are clearly not invariably apparent. You'll notice I didn't highlight the part that says stare blankly from the back of their classrooms. Compulsory education provides the necessary foundation for fully informed decision-making. The autonomous realization of healthy communities requires an informed and intellectually capable populace. Only the actualized make truly autonomous decisions that reflect the will of their authentic selves, and authentic volunteerism amongst consenting adults requires adults capable of consenting. And if this is an answer to national service are bad or destined to fail, okay, it's just I stuck it in here instead of with the AT compulsion bad, in case anybody's like, well, you shouldn't force people. Well, objections relating to compulsion are objections of a deprecated principlist approach that bears no resemblance to real-world problem solution metrics. Prefer a postmodern discursive approach. I always misspell discursive. Always correct to discursive. Foucaultian notions of discourse can be interpreted in more pragmatic, local, contextual terms as the actual words or talk of organizations during their day-to-day operations. This stuff right here is all bullshit, okay? There's nothing but bullshit here. And the whole point of it is to try to muddy anybody's principlist objections to this. Now, the principalists should win that argument if they know what they're doing. But let's talk about why this case is structured the way it is. So, the resolution is about national service, and that in the United States, national service ought to be compulsory. So I'm saying it already is compulsory in the status quo for children, and that's a good thing. And that we should recognize it as national service. So that there's some cards that seem to be missing from here about that it's a good idea to recognize their national service as such, because it's not currently recognized as such in the status quo, and that's unfair to them because they're not getting credit for work that they're doing. So there are a couple of cards, I don't know what happened to those, but okay. The reason this is structured the way it is because I'm trying to get around the real issue. The real issue being, should there be a draft or something like that? A draft with alternatives is normally the way compulsory national service is understood, right? It's like you either have to be in the military or you have to do some alternative like the Peace Corps or Teach America or something like that, right? But by sidestepping that issue in all of its substance, I managed to avoid everything that everybody's prepped out for, right? So people prep out for all the arguments they can anticipate. Nobody could anticipate this argument. And, I think Grace won the tournament with this, if I remember correctly. With this and the neg side of the resolution. So, coming at a resolution when you're arguing something, in my opinion, winning and losing strategically begins with being squirrely a lot of times. Not always, depends on the resolution. Some of them resist squirreliness, and some of them lean themselves to squirreliness. This was a Lincoln-Douglas resolution, and this is a Lincoln-Douglas case, which means that, how long is this video going on for? Because the case should take about 7 minutes to read, or 6 minutes to read. I mean, the opening app and LD is 6 minutes. That seemed a little short. It does seem to be missing a couple of cards in here. But that's fine. I think we ended up cutting out this linguistic homogenization part and replacing it with something that that said why it's important that we recognize children's service officially and give them like a certificate or something. Because otherwise it's just slavery, you know. Whereas if it's recognized as compulsory service and part of your national duty, well then it should be recognized as such, and you should get that sort of citizen credit for it, right? But if it's in fact, if it's not recognized as such, then what is it? Isn't it just slavery? Like slavery for your own good? What do you think, PP? I agree with you. You do? How nice of you. Thank you for agreeing. I appreciate that. You're my beloved kitty friend. Yes, you are. Okay, so, now when arguing this case, of course, let's say you were trying to argue against this case, and you were arguing that first of all, no, there shouldn't be compulsory national service. Is what you're. If you think about the neg case side on this, you go in there expecting to argue, no, there shouldn't be compulsory national service. And then you end up facing this case, what do you say? You can try to argue that education is not compulsory national service, but the way it's defined here is fair and reasonable, and under these definitions it does qualify as compulsory national service. It does exist in the status quo. So the best way to attack this argument, if I were going to come at it from the neg side, I would say, first of all, you're not changing the status quo, so you're trying to seize the neg ground, and you cannot affirm without changing the status quo. So that's why I ended up adding, and I wish I had the proper version of this in front of me, but regardless, that's why I ended up adding the stuff about recognizing it officially, give them a certificate or something. It's because I figured that somebody might run that. Nobody would have run it anyway, because it's that you have to be pretty on top of your shit to realize that in a middle school LD tournament. To know that the attack here is against the AF's claim of the status quo as AF ground. It's a theory argument you have to make that goes, the AF can't change the status quo by not changing the status quo, and if the AF's not doing anything, in other words, they're not affirming an advocacy of any sort, and they're not affirming and an advocacy can simply be a truth-testing advocacy, right? You can simply go, I advocate that from now on, we understand that compulsory national service include education within the definitional scope, and thus we've changed the status quo in some regard. But the thing is, in order to change status quo in this instance, you need to say that we don't understand it as compulsory national service in the status quo, and we ought to understand it as such. And we ought to affirm that it's a good thing, the status quo as it is. But we also have to advocate that we should change it in some regard, because we need to give them a certificate now. And the reason for this is because debate is sourced from legislative bodies originally, and ultimately we can talk about truth testing paradigms like whether a sentence is true or not all we want, but functionally we're having those conversations because we want to know what to do more precisely. And so in a legislative body, somebody's advocating passage of a bill, which is a course of action that's being proposed that maybe we should pursue. So in order to debate about it, you you assume the AF has fiat, so that the NAIG doesn't get to argue things like, there's not enough political will to pass this bill, so we shouldn't pass it. Because there's a understanding, there's a distinction between the normative and the actual. Like, we're arguing about whether we should pass it right now, because we're supposed to be making a decision about whether to pass it, not determining whether or not, before we argue it, there's enough will to pass it, right? So, that's why the AF has to change the status quo, because they're the one advocating something. And if they don't change the status quo, then they're not really affirming anything, and it doesn't matter. So, that's how you should attack this case. The other thing is the impacts. Education is impacts. What best helps education is not consistent as a framework with the resolution. So the resolution would suggest whatever else best helps the nation should be the natural criterion for victory in this particular topic, right? But instead, I try in this case, probably it's a bit of a reach to say, well, we should use education. And the way I link it is by having this topicality argument that says learning is topical as a form of national service, therefore it's legitimate as a criterion, which is a reach. You know, it's not really true what's going on there. And if I were to redo it now, I'd probably lose this impact and say whatever's best for the nation, and then make the case that education is what's best for the nation, instead of trying to leap over that little gap there, you know. So then these burdens, let's look at these. To negate this resolution, then, my opponent must either negate the institution of compulsory education or defeat these ground arguments here made, which establish for the purposes of this round that compulsory education is in fact a form of national service, and ought to be recognized as such in a new status quo that we're affirming. Would be what needs to be added there, you know. This is a wicked, wrong, bad argument, okay? I gotta say, this is a great thing about competition debate. It's for fun and for competition, and it doesn't matter what you're arguing, really, you know. It's like people develop beliefs over the course of doing debate as they determine what arguments are best and which ones really withstand scrutiny. But you know, nobody cares what they believe when they're in and around debating. You know, they're just trying to win. It doesn't matter, because we're not actually passing these laws, so if we're advocating for something that's bad, it's okay. It's practicing the art of understanding argumentation. People who don't practice making arguments for bad things will never know what good things are. To say that an individual has his rights violated in a way that has any impact under a rights-based framework is to speak of an individual who has the capacity to consent. Well, okay, that's true, and children cannot legally consent, okay, but that's not under a rights-based framework, that's under a legal framework, and that's what makes this argument bullshit. I put a little framework switcheroo on you there. So, don't believe this, is my point. Children cannot legally consent, thus compulsion of children for their welfare may be understood as coercive or mean or something, but not rights violating. It's like, that's what I mean, you gotta just love the fact that, there exists a wonderful sport where this kind of slick move is rewarded by the sport, you know. And people go, if I saw this in the round, I'd go, oh, you've got a fucking sly coach, And I sit there and I wait for the other person to go. You just shifted frameworks there within this little analytic, because the fact that children cannot legally consent, if they could not actually consent, then you might be right. But children can actually consent. In other words, they can say, yes, I agree to this, or no, I don't agree to this. Now, we all agree that there are certain things they ought not be permitted to consent to, but that doesn't mean that they're incapable of consenting or not consenting to things. Like, if one child is twisting another child's arm, the person's trying to pull away, obviously the other child's not consenting to having his arm twisted, and it's a relevant matter, you know? So that's what makes this argument so wrong. And you gotta be careful when you read shit that flows slick like this, because there's probably some little trick in there, you know? Okay, so then these cards, to a large extent, are here because it's expected. Like, you've got to have some sort of impacts and some sort of fancy sounding evidence and shit. Not because it actually makes the arguments better, really. Like, this self-determination, these are ways to link to impacts from education beyond just being educated, right? Like, no, actually, the realization of each individual human being is dependent on our continuing to force children to go to school. But celebrating them for it with a certificate. Okay, so that's how you make a debate case. And that's how you make a pretty airtight debate case. Like, this one is tough to beat and round without theory. You gotta run theory on it, and I mean, well, what else could you do in it? I mean, actually, I would say, I would negate by saying that children shouldn't be forced to go to school. Would probably be the most obvious way to negate it, now that I think about it. But here's the thing. If somebody were to argue that in the debate round with my student would have said, I'm sure I probably did tell her to say this, if that happened. If they try to negate compulsory education, you say, our very ability to debate this topic here today supervenes upon compulsory education. You can't vote against compulsory education without calling off this debate round. Judge, you know, it creates an unresolvable contradiction to say that we should not be engaged in compulsory education, which is the source of both of our ability to compete here today, is to self-destruct in some capacity, you know. Anyway, that's it for this video. I hope, if people hate this video or think it's stupid or it just doesn't get any views or whatever, then I won't make the neg. If it gets a little bit of positivity or encouragement, if I get some encouragement on this, then I'll make the neg one too. The neg's actually a better case. The neg's a slick ass case. It's a critique too. This is not a critique. This is being squirrely. The neg case is a critique on the use of the word nation. So I'll do that one maybe later if I get any sort of positive feedback on this one. Thanks for watching, and this has been a very special episode of Debate Police.
Debate police. All the people with their arguments state their claims with such confidence. If or not they know, things has yet to be ascertained. All the people with their arguments state their claims with such confidence. If or not they know, things has yet to be ascertained. Police.